Good evening, everybody. It's another Saturday, and I'm glad to be here with you all. I hope you're well. I hope you're warm wherever you are, and that all is well with you. It's another episode of the Love Again podcast, and I'm excited, really excited, to be here with you today. It's a very special conversation that I've been wanting to have for for a minute, and so I'm glad we're getting ready to have this conversation. If you could share the stream, that would be great. We want to invite as many people in on to be on this conversation, this enlightening conversation we're getting ready to have. um I don't know, I don't know where to start. The introduction of this powerful woman. We've known each other for a minute now. It's been a it's been a minute, and I've watched her evolve into her own self in a very beautiful way. She is a pastor. She is a playwright. She's an author. She's a wife. She's a spiritual mother. She's an entrepreneur. Like, she wears so many hats that it's dizzying sometimes. All the things that she's able to get done, but she does it, and she does it with grace. She is the wife of my pastor, and I'm excited that she took the time to come in to be with us and bless the podcast. It's the one and only Andria Stennis-Hudson. Let's welcome her to the podcast. How are you, ma'am?
I am well. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here
Yeah.
with the one and only Patrick Schaefer, theologian, entrepreneur, author,
Right.
podcaster.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
I'm well. I am well. I have no complaints.
Good. Where are you? Because you could be anywhere on this green earth.
Yes. So I am inside of my home on this
Okay.
Saturday afternoon, which is a little rare for me,
Hmm.
but I'm actually loving it
Yeah.
because come March, the month of March into the rest of the year, it's going to be busy, 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 busy. So I'm
Yeah.
actually loving this downtime. So it's all good.
That's wonderful. How's everything in Chicago?
Everything in Chicago is Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah.
The weather flip flops. So we have like 45 degrees today, which is for those of you that are Midwesterners, you understand that 45 degrees is good. It feels like it's 75,
Yeah.
especially in
In
February.
February, yeah. That's a great day. Like it.
It's a good day in February. And then you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Do not.
We had snow a few days ago. So,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
play it by ear.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally understand that. Again, thank you. I've thanked you about 3 or 4 times since we started talking, but thank you again for taking out the time to be with us this weekend. I want to start here, where I start with every guest that we have. Um, my question is, if if you had to write your origin story, um, what would that narrative be, and who are some of the most important people in your beginnings?
Absolutely. So, if I had to do an autobiography of my life, I would say that I am definitely a lover of life.
Mhm.
And it's not, saying that everything in my life has been perfect, because it has not. I've been through a lot of challenges, especially within the last 5 to 10 years or so. But I believe that one of the things that I admire about myself is that I always try to find the optimism in everything. I've been like that since I was a little girl. I don't. I guess it just never left me. I was actually talking to my husband the other day, and we were sharing some things. And as a part of entrepreneurship, I'm a life coach, and I'm a life coach to leaders, those in ministry and in marketplace. And when I'm doing a coaching session with someone, I always take them back to their origin. I always have them to describe to me who they were at 5 years old. Who were they? at 10 years old? Who were they at 15? And we do these increments because I want to see if there were any changes, life changes, that probably changed their personality, their perspective. And of course, for some of us, could have experienced trauma at 10. So that changed who we were between 5 and 10. And so I am blessed that who I am now is the same little girl I was when I was 5.
Mm-hmm.
Just very optimistic, love to have fun, love to be around people. My parents are a huge portion of who I am today. Grateful that they're both living. They're just, they're my foundation.
Mm-hmm.
They taught me the principles of God. They taught me the principles of the Word of God. But then they also taught me and my siblings balance. And so even though my parents are pastors and have been now 40 years now, we were not those children that, regretted being in church or have this ugly stigma of church, because they always showed us balance. They showed us that we can be active in ministry and still have fun. We can still do extracurricular activities. We could be whatever we wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that has carried into who I am as an adult, now as a wife, now as a minister, now as an entrepreneur, as a leader. I still hold those core values till this day, that if I want to do it, I can do it. And the
Mm-hmm.
only person that's stopping me is me.
So you grew up in church. Was this the church that were your parents pastoring the church, or did you grow up in another church?
This is the church that my parents have pastored.
Okay.
I was a former pastor's kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
always tell individuals that God has a funny sense of humor, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm now married to a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me, it was not something that I planned
Mm-hmm.
at
Mm-hmm.
all.
Did you grow up in Chicago?
I did. I did. I did.
So I'm always interested in our formative years and the context and the space we grew up. Like, it would be different to go through your formative years if you were in Brooklyn, New York. Like, that's a very different experience. But Chicago is this kind of eclectic, wonderful political, religious space that you had everything going on. And I'm wondering, as you were growing up, how were you experiencing the city and Chicago, and like, how did that help shape your ideas about the world and church and politics or whatever?
Absolutely. So I was born on the west side of Chicago.
Oof.
Please don't do that. Please do not do that. That was not nice. Okay. And
You different. No. People grew up on
that was not nice. But I was
Chicago.
born. I was born on the west side of Chicago.
Yeah.
My dad was in corporate America. My mom, although she was a college graduate, she stayed home to raise us. And so, and then they both, started a ministry right out of their home. So, I was sharing with someone that as a little girl, I remember, coming out of my bedroom, going down the stairs into the church, because that's where they birthed their church at. It was right there in our home, in the basement of our home.
Mhm.
Now, we didn't stay on the west side of Chicago. We still stayed west, but we did not stay in the inner city, but we went to a suburb of Chicago called Oak Park.
Oh,
And
you moved up. Y'all came up. Like, if you go from you go from Roosevelt Road, and you go from
oh, this is
to
gonna
Oak
be fun
Park,
today.
somebody came up.
We're going to have a lot of fun today, I see. So Oak Park, for those that don't know Oak Park, it's like a melting pot. And so it's a very affluent suburb. And so I graduated from the high school there, decided
Oak
to
Park
stay
River Forest?
Oak Park River Forest, class
Oh,
of
you one of
19.
them.
Yes,
Oh,
I
now
am.
good. Now it all comes together now. It all makes sense now.
You know what? You and I need to have these conversations offline. Yes, we do. So I graduated from Oak Park River Forest, class of 1995.
Okay.
One of the things that I love about Chicago is that although Chicago is a very big city, it's very small. And
Mhm.
so it's almost like we have 6 degrees of separation.
Mhm.
Somebody knows somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that's a cousin to somebody. It's just
Right.
always been that way. One of the things that I've loved about living in the Chicagoland area is there's so much history here
Mhm.
and so much culture, from the food to the shopping to the neighborhoods to the art to the entertainment. I remember as a little girl, I always had a love for theater, which is why I still do theater to this day, writing plays, producing shows. And my mom and dad would take us downtown,
Mhm.
so we can have that experience of going to an opera or going to see a show at the Goodman Theater or going to the museums here in Chicago. It's just a
Yeah.
rich history of
Mm.
culture here. And unfortunately, over the decades, the stigma of Chicago has changed, and people don't really, know about the culture that's here, that's
Yeah.
represented in so many facets. So even though I grew up in the church, I still had a very balanced life. I learned every instrument that I could. I'm a former organist and keyboard player.
Okay.
Don't say nothing,
Okay.
Patrick.
No, 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 no. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you played. No.
Saxophone. I did
Yeah.
cheerleading. I did basketball. I did, writing. Everything that I could think of, and it
Mhm.
embraced what the city offered. So
Yeah.
if there was something going on in the city, they made sure that we were a part of it outside
Mhm.
of church.
Mhm.
And I think that's the reason why, one of the reasons why, that even till this day, I still have a love for God and ministry, because I was not tainted
Yeah.
very negative way. I was surrounded by negativity at times,
Mhm.
just the whole church drama. But because I had a balanced life, it did not taint me. So,
Yeah.
for those that are watching and listening, if you've never visited Chicago, you got to come. It's just so much to offer here and so much
Yeah.
to do. It is.
It's a world-class city.
It really is.
It's a beautiful city. Um, and being born and raised in Chicago, you get spoiled because then you go to other cities and like you see their downtown and you be like, this is
I,
I went
you
to
know,
downtown Atlanta one day and it's like one block. I said, well, where is like, wait, like, what is
Very true. And
what?
although I love the West Coast, I've grown to love the West Coast
Yeah.
over the last 6 or 7 years,
Mhm.
especially the California area. But their
Yeah.
downtown is not like
Mhm.
Chicago.
It's
And,
like,
and we are spoiled. We go
yeah.
to these other cities waiting for the nightlife and the restaurants.
Absolutely. Where are the big skyscrapers and the buildings and where's your lake at? Like where's
Yes,
what like what is
absolutely.
so it's a it's a very beautiful city. It's a world-class city. And it has a rich church history also. Um I'm wondering um who taught you about love and where did you get your language for love in your early years? Do you remember it something that your parents sat down and talked with you about and said, "Well, this is love, and this is what it isn't," or was it something that you observed and then you added your own language around it? How was that? How did that come into formation for you?
I believe anything that is taught, number one, is either taught or caught. So you may not have had someone to actually sit you down and say ABC, one, two,
Mhm,
three, but you're in an environment where it is constantly being exemplified and modeled to you. And
mhm,
that's both positive and negative.
mhm,
So some individuals may have seen a negative light of love, a negative example of love, and then had to be actually taught what love is. So I
mhm,
believe that I had both. I caught some things because parents were, happily married, still happily married. I
mhm.
believe they'll be celebrating 47 years of marriage this year.
Wow,
So
wow.
I saw two parents that loved
Mhm,
each other, modeled love.
mhm,
If they had a disagreement or anything, the children didn't know about it.
mhm,
They were very big that, whatever stays in this goes on in this house stays in this house. They
mhm.
never argued in front of us. I believe because they wanted to model what love looked like. And
Yeah.
then of course, being taught. So I, not only growing up in a Christian household, but also went to private schools as well.
Of
Primarily,
course you did.
stop. When I tell you, we got to have these conversations offline. So we went to a private school,
Mhm.
and again, classes on religion and learning about the love of God, Sunday school, of course, again, learning about the love of God. I would say though, it was more so what was modeled before me.
Mhm.
And I didn't know that what I saw modeled before me was not necessarily modeled in every home. So
Mhm.
when I went to school and I would hear my peers, talk about what they saw in their homes, it was like, wait a minute,
Mhm.
what? For
Mhm.
real? Really? It goes on. And as a child, you just assume that if I see mommy and daddy happy, that everybody got mommy and daddy happy in their homes. And
Right.
that's not the case. And so I
Right.
really do believe that what is shown to you is just as great as what is taught to you.
Mhm.
Caught and taught, what you see, and then what is modeled, as well
Mhm.
as what somebody is instructing you. And that could be about love or any subject as it pertains to life.
Do you think that that specific experience that you had did it help or hinder? Because you would say, well, they never argued in front of us, and then I would think, well, did you know how to have an argument with your significant other that was healthy if you had never seen that done? Like, if the model was all good, and that's great, and it gives you some foundations, there are some details, about really, well, what is relationship, or how do people talk to one another behind closed doors? If you had never seen that, do you think, like, well, maybe once in a while they should have like, that would have been nice to add to it, or did you
Mhm.
have to discover how to do that on your own?
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there are times that they would, disagree, but actively arguing, we
Hmm.
didn't see that.
Okay.
Now, I will say that I've always been a very strong-willed individual. Could
Hmm.
be because of my place in the family, which I'm the eldest.
Hmm.
So that could be, why I'm a very strong-willed person. I'm also a person, an individual that will speak my mind. I know how to, back off, but then I know how to let you know what I
Hmm.
know
Hmm.
when you need to know.
Hmm.
And I think also that even though the whole arguing thing wasn't never really shown,
Hmm.
when it's time for you to speak up for yourself outside of your environment, your safe place at home, there is something on the inside of you that will propel you to do it.
Hmm.
I think it's just, your that DNA on the inside of you, that, whatever your personality is outside of the home will show up. And
Hmm.
so even though I did not see a whole lot of arguing, don't mean that I don't know how to argue.
Yeah, no,
Don't mean that I don't know how to
no,
let
no, no.
you know.
Absolutely, no. I totally get that, and I'm wondering, and so I'm wondering, like, what environment, like, as you're coming into like your teenage years, and were you allowed to date? Were you allowed to have boyfriends? And I know sometimes, of course, parents parent children very differently from,
Mhm.
and boys and girls, they're just different. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering, was that something that they were overly protective of, or did they allow you to kind of create your own social space?
So they were very overly protective of that. And
Mhm.
I understand now more than ever. I didn't really understand then, when you're 14, 15, 16, you want to taste what's out there, because it
Mhm.
looks appealing. Everybody is doing it, and it just seems like it's fun, and there are no consequences. And they were, very adamant about, what the word of God talked about as it pertains to sex before marriage.
Mhm.
They were very adamant about what the will of God is, and knowing the will of God, and knowing that you're different. You're not like everybody else. And I understand that now more than ever. And I'm grateful for the protection. I am. I did not like it back then. I
Mhm.
did not understand it. I did not want it. But I'm very grateful now,
Mhm.
because it did help shape um, my views on certain things as it pertains to sexuality, as it pertains to knowing when to have boundaries set.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
had those boundaries set, and even though we didn't like them, it was for our protection. When I
Yeah.
went off to college, and was also working full time and going to school, and younger gentlemen were wanting to talk to me, and I've always had male friends.
Mhm.
I have both female and male friends till this day. And
Mhm.
so when I knew that they really wanted to really get with me, I then knew how to implement boundaries.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, we can talk, but I'm not just going to just be hanging out with you, especially if I don't see any future,
Got you.
especially if I know what you are, what you're into. We can talk, but
Right.
but I'm not that chick. And so, growing up, the guys would be like, "Oh, you so starchy, oh, you so stuffy and everything," but they respected me.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
demand I demanded respect.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
did.
I
Even
believe you.
and even to the point, you said you believe me.
I believe you. I do.
And even when it was time for my husband now, who's been
Mhm.
my husband for almost 19 years of marriage,
Mhm.
when we were courting in the beginning, and he was, church, pastor of a church,
Mhm.
all of that, I did not care.
Mhm.
You go toe the line with me.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he was like, wait, come on.
Mhm.
And it was
Mhm.
just like, no, I demanded respect. I knew what my worth was, and I knew what my value, and you were going to respect my value. You were going to respect my worth.
Let me ask you this. If you could look over your shoulder, was there a conversation that you wish your parents would have had with you, um, that they perhaps didn't? And I ask this because I was talking with my mother the other day, and um, I was like, I wish you would have explained the concept like of death to me. Like all of a sudden, as a kid, you go to this creepy place and everybody's sad and like somebody's in the room and clearly not engaged as the rest of us. Like, well, what is death? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? It was just like we just go on and this is what this was. And I had to discover exactly what that meant later. And that was just one conversation. Like, I really wish you all would explain that to me. Can you think of a conversation that you wish you would have had with your parents when you were younger?
That's a great question, Patrick. And even your example, I can definitely relate to that. So, my grandmother, one of my grandmothers, who I was very close to, and she was very close to us. She was actually my mother's mother.
Mhm.
She fell ill, and you just think that people are going to live forever,
Right.
especially the ones that are very close to you.
Sure.
And her death kind of shocked us. It
Mhm.
did. It was just one of those things that she fell ill, she got better, and then all of a sudden she was back in the hospital, and before we know it, she was gone.
Mhm.
And I didn't understand then, like I had questions for God. I still loved him, I still believed in him, but I had
Mhm.
questions,
Mhm.
because it was like, if you're praying for someone to get healthy, if you're praying for their healing, why are they gone?
Mhm.
And I had those questions. I was 20, 21.
Mhm.
Of course, been in church all my life, taught about the Lord, but
Mhm.
this particular situation just hit differently.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it hit very differently to
Right.
go to the hospital one day and
Mhm.
see her living. And then 2 days later, we get a call saying, come back to the hospital. She's not going to make it. And
Yeah.
she died later on that day. I had questions
Mhm.
before the Lord. I did not understand, like, why, what's the use of praying for somebody's healing if they're going to die? It's just one of those things that kind of, I would say, question my faith. So I think that, that particular situation, I probably just if someone would have told us that, healing can be several things.
Yeah.
It can be through surgery, it can be through medicine, it can be through treatment, and then they can also get their healing on the other side.
Yeah.
So I had to actually learn and fight my way through that situation about, what type of faith I had and what I was taught prior to that. And knowing that God is still God. And, even though we don't understand death and why it happens, it is a part of life. And that, that she did receive her healing. It just wasn't the way that I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think that especially in our early formative years as people and specifically as Christians, when we talk about God, we're talking through salvation, what God gave through his son. And we have all of these benefits and all of these things. And then there comes a point where we have to be broad enough or mature enough to understand that our faith isn't about all the things that we get. It encompasses some of the things that we lose along the way, right? That we don't get to keep everything. We don't get to keep everybody, that we don't understand sometimes seasons and, time, and there's a time for this and then times change. And it's very difficult. I remember a death I was about 19 that really rocked me. Just, I could not get over it and couldn't understand it. And it takes some work. It takes some praying. It takes some conversation. It takes some crying. It takes all those things to kind of become at peace with, I'm on a walk with the Lord, and yet I'm going to lose some things along the way, and how I handle that loss, because sometimes some losses are so devastating, they could take up years of your life. Like, you just never get over it. You don't know how to get over it. And so I remember that, and I was like, well, I wish you all would have, a little early on, let's talk me through so I can know what to expect. And I think that even happens in our relationships. All of our relationships before, marriage or what we have, that one relationship, we don't keep them all, right? We could go into it with great intentions and, the wonder about what this is, and then it doesn't happen the way we have in our mind, and it doesn't play out. I'm interested in your early boyfriends, and we don't have to name names and nothing.
Oh,
No. All I'm saying is, I'm interested in how when the relationship did not work out the way you thought it was going to work out, or however you hoped, how did you deal with your broken heart? And what did that teach you about how you heal and how we heal as people?
Yeah, I remember when I was 17, I just thought that I was in love. Had met this guy, and he was what I felt, was perfect for me. He was also a believer, and we clicked. We have a lot of things in common, and now that I'm reflecting, you do see red flags. I see them now that I didn't see them then. And so I just, felt like this was going to be it, no more after this way. He is it. Saw some red flags at 17. Going into 18, we dated. I was in my first year of college, so we were still dating. And I saw some red flags, and I didn't think anything about it. It's just, one of those brush offs, shrug offs. No big deal. Nobody's perfect. And of course, things didn't work out the way that I thought that they would. And some other, drama issues, came into play and all of that. Because I feel that it was like my first love. It took me the longest to get over that. And
did you break up with him, or did he break up with you?
What? Huh?
Of course, I'm sorry. You went to Oak Park River Forest.
What?
I know. Okay.
Offline. But no, I did break up with him. I remember,
Mhm.
I remembered like it was yesterday. I remember the conversation. I remembered his denial and
Mhm.
all of that. And I remember going to sleep crying my eyes out. And the next day, numb, just
Mhm.
absolutely numb,
Mhm.
totally numb. And
Mhm.
I remember that it took months for me to get over that. And
Mhm.
I do mean months. First year of college, excited to be in college, meeting new friends, all of that good stuff. But still, like a hole was in my heart.
Mhm.
And I remember seeing him months later. We had like a run in at an event, and it just all of those emotions came flooding back. And I
Mhm.
realized I wasn't over him.
Mhm.
And so this was something that I actually had to take to the Lord,
Mhm.
because I said, God, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to live broken. I don't want to live holding on to something that I know is not good for me.
Mhm.
I don't want to be waiting on somebody to change their mind when there's a whole sea of individuals out
Mhm.
there,
Mhm. Mhm.
uh-huh, that would be honored
Mhm.
to have my company. And I
Mhm.
and I actually told the Lord, get this out of me.
Mhm.
It's terrible. I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to feel rejected. I don't
Mhm.
want to feel betrayed. I don't want to feel broken. And
Mhm.
I remember taking that to God and being completely honest, like I'm talking to you right now, is the way I
Mhm.
was talking to him. Prayer is not all these big, lavish words and all of that. It's just talking to God about how you feel.
Right.
And I told God, I hate this. I
Mhm.
don't want to feel this way. And I remember that even after that prayer, each day it got better and better and
Mhm.
better and better and better. And then I was all good after a while. I was, was back to my
Of course
like,
you were.
what's his name? Oh yeah.
I'm interested though, because understanding how you grew up and having this sense of presence about yourself, and I'm sure at 20 something you carry that into every room you went into. I'm interested in, how did you think that you were perceived by the people? And let me explain why. Because sometimes women, especially women of faith, when they value themselves, it creates this thing around them where they're not approachable, right? And then they'll say, well, I don't know why I'm single. Could be because you don't seem like you seem safe but not a very pleasant person. And then when someone does engage you, you have all of these kind of walls up and you're suspicious about everything. And it's one thing to value yourself, and it's one thing to want someone, a man, to pursue you. But I think on the other end is that perhaps on some level or another, you got to slow down, stop running so fast in order to actually, be caught or to catch up so we can talk. Um, and I'm wondering, when you, as a pastor, you look at, relationships and seeing them in a lot of different contexts, and your own experience, what do you think are some of the things that are essential for a woman to keep her value and yet be able to connect with someone on a social level to even discover that thing?
Flexibility.
Mhm.
So I tell single women, because that is one of the demographics that I believe I'm called to empower, is
Mhm.
be flexible. So I was that individual back in the day where I did have some, guys that say, you're pretty, you got it going on, but you are not approachable. And
Mhm.
I was like,
Mhm.
who, what, what?
Were
No,
they right?
they were right. They
Mhm.
were
Mhm.
right. They were
Mhm.
right, because I was just like, this is my little box. And if you don't fit into my boundaries and all of this stuff, then, and I had to think about that. I had to think
Mhm.
about that. I'm like, do you want to be alone for the rest of your life? I'm not telling
Mhm.
you to lower your standards, but I am telling you to be flexible, even
Mhm.
with just your facial expressions. Just your facial expressions. No guy is going
Mhm.
to approach you if you're always looking mean.
Right.
You're always
Right.
looking like, you don't want to be bothered, as some individuals, some ladies will say, well, I'm focused. What are you focusing on that much that you that you look mean?
Right.
Be
Right. Right.
flexible. Be flexible. It's good to know what you want, but you're not going to
Mhm.
get every single little thing on your list.
You're right. And I think that sometimes we can hide our social awkwardness up under being saved,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And so sometimes, you're not always comfortable in every social environment. And so since you're not, you put up this wall where you don't make eye contact, you don't smile, you don't do all of these things. And all of these are just signals that say, leave me alone. Like I don't and it could be the opposite actually of what you really want. And so I think it's a disconnect sometimes into what our intentions are and what our body language and what our conversation is actually putting out. Do you see that still being a problem when you talk to single people?
Yes, absolutely. I actually did a post maybe last week or so, and I told the ladies, I specifically did the post for single women, and I said, they want to approach you, but you're looking mean and you're
Mhm,
looking bothered. And the responses that I received on that post, they all said, you're right. Somebody
mhm,
told me that. You're right.
mhm,
I do need to change my disposition. You're right. I do need to
mhm.
change how I look. You're right. I do look mean. You're right. And I'm sitting there reading the responses and I'm like, oh my God. Okay,
Yeah.
this isn't, yeah. So we've got to do some teaching here. We've got to do some personal development, because the very one that it could be actually the one that will be a match for you is afraid to approach you just
Right.
by how you're, and it doesn't mean that you don't respect yourself. It doesn't mean that you have less value. It's just being flexible. So I've learned that even though I've grown up in church, I need to be adaptable and flexible to every environment. So
Yeah.
wherever I am, I may be bringing the kingdom wherever I am, but I
Mhm.
can't be so super saved and
Yeah.
super deep that
Right.
I'm not adaptable to that environment and I'm not flexible enough to know how to connect and
Right.
negotiate and all of that, because sometimes we can, when you grow up in church and you know the ins and out of church and all of that,
Mhm.
some individuals don't know how to function outside of church.
Like be a person, just just be a nice person. Like
Yes.
that's it, and we'll go from there. But if we haven't developed our person and our personality, and we spend so much time trying to hide, because I think sometimes when life is uncertain and we're unsure, we run into our spirituality, which perhaps is a good instinct to have, but that doesn't always solve every heart issue, social issue, because we are more than just spirit. We are, soul. We are in our bodies. And so we run into church. And I remember as a kid, we stayed in church a lot. Like we did church. We was in church. I tell everybody I thought school was somewhere you went in between going to church. Like
Listen,
I
listen.
just thought it was just somewhere 'cause we would get picked up from school and we would go to church. That's what it was. And while that could be healthy and it kept us safe, it did not always complete us as whole people. Um, because the skills that we needed to have successful church are very different from the skills you need to have a successful life, right?
Yes, yes.
And we think like, if I'm good at church and good at being saved, then I'll be good at everything. That's not true.
And you know what? To your point, that involves relationships as well
Yeah,
and matters of the heart.
yeah.
And so when I experienced my first heartbreak, when I experienced that, that was a little foreign to me.
Mhm.
I had never found myself so engaged in a person, just so connected to a person, and then
Mhm.
have that break, that heartbreak like that. I had never experienced that before.
Mhm.
So it was like, whoa, this is
Mhm.
terrible.
Mhm.
It was like, how come nobody warned me of this?
Right. Nobody told you what to do when it doesn't work out the way.
Yes. Like, why? And no one told me that it was going to be,
Right.
you hear all the R&B songs about
Yeah.
heartbreak and all of that, but to actually go through that, it
Got to
was
get
like,
real, don't it?
oh, this is, it's like, what is going on?
Right.
And so
Right.
I
Right.
think that, if we continue to empower individuals, especially those in church, in ministry, to let them know that you are still a human being,
Yeah.
and that doesn't make you exempt from heartbreak. It doesn't make you exempt from disappointments. It doesn't make you exempt from rejection and all of these things that come with life. It
Sure.
doesn't
And
make
it
you,
doesn't make you less saved,
and it
right? It doesn't
doesn't
make
make
you
you
less Holy Ghost feel. Like you could,
no.
I think sometimes we use the spirit like to avoid life and like, well, the Holy Ghost ain't, just gonna work everything out for me or whatever. And I think it's more to life than just our spirituality. And things don't always work out the way we want them to work out. And if we don't learn that skill early, you don't need to be 45 just now learning that everything you prayed about is not going to happen the way you wanted it to happen. Like you need to learn that
Yes.
way early.
And I'm glad that I experienced that. I didn't, because it showed me my humanity at 19, 20 years old when that happened, 18, 19, 20 years old. It showed me my humanity. It showed me that if you cut me, I bleed. If you break my heart, I'm gonna feel it. I'm gonna
You didn't
cry.
think that could happen for you? You didn't
I'm
think
sorry.
that you didn't think that your heart could be broken or you could.
I did, but I had never experienced it. I mean, I
Gotcha.
knew that eventually it was going to happen. I knew that any relationship that I connect to is not going to be forever. But in the
Yeah.
back of your mind, when you're so in love and,
Mhm. Mhm.
just mesmerized, you don't think like that.
Right.
Like somebody that says I do. When you say I do in front of the preacher and
Yeah.
all of that, you don't think about that your marriage could possibly end up in two places. One
Sure.
where the spouse is taken from you and you're now left as a widow or a widower.
Mhm.
You don't think about
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
You just think that it's going to be forever,
Right.
forever,
Right.
forever.
Man.
And you don't think about the fact that things could not work out and you all may separate. So
Absolutely.
it's humanity. It's you not struggling, but you embracing humanity, that life happens. And when life happens, thankfully, you do have a superpower
Yeah.
that you can go to and run to and find safety and shelter, but you
Mhm.
still got to deal with your humanity.
Yeah. So I'm interested in after, the breakup recovery, and you found some equilibrium, you found a place. To me, I think brokenheartedness is like a virus. It has to run through your system and it takes sometimes as long as it takes. I read the other day a book that says that our grief is a sequel to our love,
Mm,
right? That when we lose someone, the next phase of our relationship with them is our grief because we have lost so much, and that our losses can be great because we've loved greatly. But sometime after that, you found yourself whole enough to say, oh well, I'm ready to date again. And I don't know the timeline, but one day you met William Hudson the third. And I'm interested. Yeah, I'm gonna ask all these questions. Um, I'm interested. Because we knew each other when we were teenagers. and he was on Amen and things like that, and he was had been preaching since he was preaching long before any of us were preaching. Did you know him before you met him?
So let me just throw this in.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that first heartbreak that I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And so a few years later, after I had, gotten healed and everything, I found myself in another relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Great guy, and then happened again.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as devastating as the
Mm-hmm.
first one,
Mm-hmm.
but of course, I was I was disappointed, but I knew how to handle. That first heartbreak taught me how to handle heartbreak,
Mm-hmm.
and oddly enough, it happened maybe about a year and a half or so, or maybe close to 2 years before I met my husband.
Mm-hmm.
Before I met my husband, that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very hopeful though. It happened and things didn't work out and all of that. And I was upset, not as, totally heartbroken like I was.
You're disappointed.
Disappointed.
Yes.
Maybe that's a better word. I
Yeah.
was disappointed. I was
Yeah.
disappointed. But I was very hopeful. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, I know I'm going to find love. Love is going to find me.
Mm-hmm.
Did I know that it was going to be in the person of my husband?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you stated, he had been a preacher all of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to come to my parents' church and preach.
Okay. Okay.
But never, ever, ever was there any type of a communication or attraction
Mm-hmm.
between him and I. He was just a preacher that came, young preacher that came, did our
Mm-hmm.
youth revivals.
Mm-hmm.
Who he is till this day. Preach, prophesy, lay hands,
Yeah.
all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Never, never. So when people ask me like, "Did you know? Are you kidding me?"
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. No
Mm-hmm.
way. And I didn't want a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that I dated were not preachers.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want a preacher. I was a pastor's kid, so I said, no, I don't have to have that. Just whoever he is, he needs to be successful, have his own identity, good paying job. We'll come to church, we'll tithe, and then we'll be downtown somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
while y'all at an evening service.
Right.
Late.
Right.
And that's completely opposite of what my life is right now. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I had no idea that it would be him.
So you all met the first time you were teenagers.
Yes, but
Okay.
we were teenagers.
Yeah.
It was just, oh, God bless you. And
Right.
off to the service.
Mhm.
Nothing like that. Nothing like that at all.
Mhm.
And I would say our ordained meeting when things look different was many years later, in my 20s, and we met at a service. I was with my parents at the time, and it was like, oh, Pastor Hudson, good to
Was
see
he
you.
preaching that night?
He was not preaching that night.
Okay.
So we actually were supporting a well-known pastor in Chicago who was being installed.
Mhm.
And we went to support him,
Mhm.
and Pastor Hudson was there to support that same individual. And you know how things are after church. You got
Right.
your food afterwards. Everybody is talking and congregating, and the pastors are fellowshipping. And I was just like, the third wheel that night. I just decided to tag along, and here he was. And we, said, hey, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a long time, and all of that. And then it just.
Right. No, I'm interested in.
Let's just say years later,
Uh-huh.
he looked much different.
Okay.
Then,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
you all exchange numbers that night, or did he find a way to get in touch with you? Like because we saints, we date differently.
We
Like
do.
we like,
We
sometimes
do.
it's very indirect ways sometimes that we find openings to have conversations.
So he actually gave his phone number to me in front of my father.
Okay.
Now, him and my dad and my mom, they already had their own little relationship because they would bring him in, years
Right.
before to preach. So they were solid with him. And so I remember, he told my father, which I didn't know. He said, your daughter is beautiful, and I don't know if he asked my father if I was seeing anybody or anything. And then I think he asked my dad, he said, whoever, she marries, they're going to have a whole lot of money because, and my father told him, well, your church is taking care of you pretty well, I heard, so
Right.
he knew that was like his green light
Mm-hmm.
to approach me. And right before the evening ended, he gave me his number right in front of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I called him a couple days later, and it just friendship grew from there, talking every day on the phone, first date, all of that.
I'm interested in how you experience love and to be in communication with someone consistently, and you feel like, oh, there's an attachment happening in me, and I'm developing feelings on another level. And I'm wondering, do you sense that about did you know what was going on? And at what point did you communicate what you were feeling? Because I think part of our relationships that gets hampered is that we don't give words around our feelings. How am I supposed to know you don't say anything, right? And so I think we have to learn how to use our words, and it's such a vulnerable environment, right? I mean, it could be scary to put yourself out there, not knowing how somebody is going to respond or if they're going to receive you. And I'm just wondering, how safe did you feel, or at what point did you feel safe enough to kind of be present with how you felt and figure out how he felt, and what was that like for you all?
I knew that I started to develop feelings for him when we would not talk, scheduling,
Mhm.
nothing negative or anything like that, but just because he was so busy as a full-time pastor at that time. I was finishing up my degree, also
Mhm.
working full-time. And so
Mhm.
whenever we didn't talk, and
Mhm.
we tried not to go for at least, a couple days without talking, I just noticed I just started to miss him. And
Mhm.
I was like, now wait a minute. Come on now. I would say these things to
Mhm.
myself like, girl, you are not falling for this guy.
Uh-oh.
For him. And I just started to notice that. Like,
Mhm.
or when he would call, I would be so excited. This was after, a couple months of talking and everything. And then and I went to my mom. I remember going to my mom, and I said, I think I like him. I said, and it wasn't like because he was a nice guy, he was a pastor. It was
Mhm.
like, I think I like him.
Mhm.
And she said, really? And I said, yeah. I said, I don't know. I said, I really do think I like him. I think I like,
Mhm.
Pastor Hudson. I didn't call him Pastor Hudson, when we
Mhm.
talked. But
Mhm.
and she said, well, how does he feel about you? And I said, I don't know. I said,
Mhm.
I think he likes me, but I don't know. And
Mhm.
she said, okay, well, just see what happens and all of that. And I remember this was after 3 months of dating. He had left me a voicemail. Oh, the whole world is going to see this.
This is why we here. No,
Whole world.
this is why we here.
So you guys don't give him a hard time, okay? So I remember we had talked and everything, and then I remember him calling back. It was much later. I believe I didn't hear the voicemail till the next day. And on the voicemail, he did this little song. Now, everybody that knows him knows that he loves to sing
Mhm.
all the time. But
Mhm.
anyway, that's so he
Mhm.
did this little song, and in the song, he told me that he was falling in love with me.
Mhm.
And so then when I heard that, I'm like, oh, we're in
Mhm.
trouble now. Seriously, I'm like,
We
we
here now. Yeah, no.
we are in trouble now, because if I was already feeling these things and now he has actually
Mhm.
expressed this, we're
Mhm.
in trouble. We're
Mhm.
really falling for each other.
Mhm.
And And I told him, I said, I heard your voicemail. I thought it was sweet. Just thought, I didn't say those words yet to him. I did
Mhm.
not. I told him, I said, I really do care about you and I really like your company. I really, all of that. I was just still so guarded because
Yeah.
here's the thing with heartbreak.
Mhm.
When you've had your heart broken a few times, you do become guarded.
Sure.
And so I wasn't ready to really let him know how I felt because I just was afraid that heartbreak was going to happen again.
Mhm. At what point did you feel safe enough to say, do you remember the first time you said I love you to him or that you were in love with him? And do you remember, did you get to a point where you felt like, well, was it like, well, I need to say this, or this makes me feel safe enough to say it and it's natural? Because I think sometimes it's not real until we both are using the
Mhm.
same language, right?
Yes.
And we're
Yes.
communicating with one another in ways we both understand. So I'm interested from what you have in your heart, what you're holding on to, till when it's like on the table. Um, how did that happen?
I was so apprehensive in
Mhm.
telling him those three words because, again, I was afraid that something was going to happen, that I
Mhm.
was going to experience another heartbreak.
Mhm.
And so even though I knew that I knew that I was in love with him, I knew it. Not because he had did a song for me, but because I was already noticing that I was changing and my feelings for him were changing.
Mhm.
I just was waiting, like, when should I tell him? When should I express it? Do I let him tell me first?
Mhm.
Or do I put myself out there? I was afraid that if I put myself out there, really put myself out there and tell him I
Mhm.
loved him, that he might not return it back.
Mhm.
And so I do remember that first time that we both said it.
Mhm.
And I went on and just put myself out there in the deep end. At the end of the conversation, like we would have, at the end, I told him I loved him, and he immediately told me, I've always loved you.
Mhm.
I love you as well. And so it was like, okay, I'm not out here looking goofy,
Right. Right.
not out here looking like a fool, but
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's why dealing with heartbreak and rejection is something that you do have to heal from,
Mhm.
because if you don't deal with it, it will show up in your future relationships, and it could possibly really restrict you from receiving love, and then you being honest about love as well.
Sure. And I think I've come to a point where I realize that our love or who we are as people is actually a result of the love and the heartbreak that we've had before, right? That I've experienced heartbreak before, but I have you, which makes me appreciate you so much more, right? I think that if we look at every relationship that did not work out the way we thought it was going to work out as a failure, then we never benefit from having it, because healing and doing the work to heal yourself is a life skill that you need to have. Like you
Yes,
need
yes, yes,
to being able to
yes.
forgive and be
Hmm.
able to move on are like, not, those are skills you should bring into a relationship, not
Yes,
practice them, for the first
yes.
time on
Hmm.
somebody. And I
Yes.
and so I think there's a way where we can look at our past and our disappointments, our heartbreaks, and say, well, it taught me something about myself, and it makes me appreciate what I have now. Then if I hadn't went through that, I don't know if I would have the same appreciation for it. Right?
Absolutely. I'm, grateful for every lesson learned, even if it's a traumatic lesson. I
Yeah.
believe that life experiences are to be learned.
Mhm.
You should learn something. You should come out of it with being better.
Yeah.
Come out of it with saying, yeah, it happened, I didn't like it, it was traumatic, it was heartbreaking, but this is what I've learned from it. And of course, learning something about yourself, learning the good, the bad, and the ugly about yourself.
Right.
And it does prepare you. It
Mm,
prepares you for what God has for you, whether it be through a person, through a career, through another job,
mm,
another opportunity, whatever it is. It prepares you, and you are more appreciative.
mhm.
You are more appreciative.
Absolutely.
You treat this new opportunity with delicacy and with care.
Precious. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you do.
Absolutely. Your situation was unique because he brought stuff and people with him, right? He had a whole vocation. Like he had been William Hudson III since he was 12. Like he was he he was a machine, just doing church work and evangelizing. And now you're getting married, and so it's not just your family, his family. There's a whole system that comes along with Bishop William Hudson III. And I'm wondering, as you were talking through wedding plans and kind of mind mapping what our life will be like, there are things that you had to consider that a normal bride, and whatever normal bride is, just a normal bride wouldn't have to consider and to take into consideration about how do we make this work where there's a crowd of people kind of around us, and that it creates its own pressure. I'm assuming, and you can tell me, expectations. They were protective over him, right? And so he, that was
You already know.
yeah, I know, and I'm wondering, how are you processing, and who helped you process going into a non-conventional situation where you have to navigate him, and then everything that was added to your life with him. Like, what was that like for you?
Ooh,
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah.
And here's the thing. I was 20, I was in my 20s when
Mhm,
all of this was going on. And I
mhm,
was still learning my identity myself, still
yeah,
developing Andria, And so although I was extremely happy and in love, it was still on the other side. I was losing who I was. I
mhm,
was losing the only church that I had really been a member of,
mhm,
and not not just a regular church. It's also my family's church. My mom and dad are the pastors. My siblings are there. My cousins and people that watched me grow up from a child. They're
mhm,
considered family now. I'm moving from one side of the town to another side of the town I had no connection to.
mhm,
From the western suburbs, northwest to the south side. Okay.
mhm.
Yeah, that was a lot.
Right.
And then I'm not just marrying a regular man,
Yeah,
I'm marrying someone that has been married to ministry all of their life.
yeah.
So, married to ministry, whole nother congregation. Women, some of the women in the congregation who, thought that they may have had a chance,
Mhm,
single women,
mhm,
the congregation that was very protective of him because
mhm,
always was a single pastor. And
mhm.
so it just was so many dynamics. And I look at this till this day and wondered, how did I navigate through all of that? I do.
There's a lot. Yeah.
There are times, Patrick, when I do like a memory stroll, and
Mhm,
I'm like, for real, God, how did I do that?
yeah.
It was just, and I was literally thrusted, like right after we had our wedding, went on our honeymoon. When we came back from honeymoon, he was in convocation.
Mhm,
And so it was like, we're coming back from our honeymoon in church the same night. It was just a lot.
yeah.
Still, of course, still working my corporate job and, just really trying to find my place in life, in the marketplace. And then now being a pastor's wife, it took much grace. I'll just say it like that. It took a lot of grace.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like I did things by trial and error. I do
Mm-hmm.
feel like that, and I'm, it is what it is. I mean, I was just trying to find myself back then. I was trying to fit in. I wanted the people to love me. I wanted them to accept me, on top of learning how to be a new wife, on
Yeah.
top of getting connected to our home that I had to build, and,
Mm-hmm.
learning this man, not just
Mm-hmm.
the pastor in the pulpit, but the man outside of the church.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot, but I'm grateful to God that even through all of that, his grace was with me and that I never gave up.
I have a couple of questions. He is a very specific personality type. I love him dearly.
Mhm.
Um, um, and I'm wondering, two headstrong people, right? And he's been running an empire, before you got there, and he's the boss, and so he's managing his business. And now you're bringing someone else who has their own opinion and their own identity, their own life, and then now we're trying to kind of co-manage
Yeah.
our life, the church,
Yes.
what's best for us. Um, and I'm wondering, how long do you think it took you all to kind of find a rhythm about, you know, you take the lead on this, I'm gonna take the lead on that, and we're not combative with one another, but we're working in kind of rhythm with one another. I assume that would have taken perhaps a little longer because you had more things to consider. You had a lot of moving parts during that time. Like, I'm wondering, how long do you think it really took you all to find that rhythm with one another?
Who I would say it took us a good 3 or 4 years.
Mhm.
And we had a lot, and not, not just, the ministry and marriage, but then we had some we had some life that happened through all of
Yeah.
that. So when we came back, while we were on our honeymoon, one of my grandmothers passed away on the
Mhm.
honeymoon.
Mhm.
We get a phone call that she's gone. So now I'm grieving on my honeymoon,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
and we come back, we bury her. Um, we come back, we're in convocation. We come back from our honeymoon, and I lose my job.
Mhm.
And we had all of this that happened within the first 6 months of our marriage.
Yeah.
I lose my job. Now I am unemployed, which I was always used to having my own money, working,
Mhm.
doing for myself, and now I'm at home in a
Mhm.
different home I've never been in, that
Mhm.
I'm trying to build.
Mhm.
Then we're also dealing with deaths on his side of the family within the first 6 months of our marriage. It just was so much.
Life.
It
Yeah. Life don't.
was life. It was, when I tell you, it was life.
Yeah.
And it was so much thrown at us at one
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
And so, as far as building our rhythm and just getting our footing and just getting to know one another, despite all of these things that were happening, it took at least 3 or 4 years. It
Mhm.
did, because it was so much that was always going on,
Yeah.
always going on with ministry,
Mhm.
always him still traveling and preaching, and and just, it
Mhm.
was just a lot. So it took a while. It did.
I'm going to be honest for a minute. Um, I think that if I had not have been married and divorced before I we started City of Faith, I think I would have got married very early on. But I think coming out of that in like my mid 20s was like, well, let me just throw myself into church work and let me build, and then I'll get married down the line. It was always my intention. And then at some point, I begin to realize how consuming ministry is. Right? It's not like it turns off. It's not a 9 to 5. It is a constant. There are ebbs and flows to it. sometimes it slows down a little bit, but it never stops. And I often pondered for myself, how could I show up in a relationship and be present the way I need to, and to be with someone if this carousel just doesn't stop. Like it is a lot. And I'm wondering, because what I do know is that ministry doesn't help marriages. It adds another weight. So either both people need to be strong enough and get their weight up so we can manage this, or I have seen ministry crush marriages. Like,
Yes.
the reason it didn't survive was because of church.
Yes.
And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. I was like, it's not fair to her. It wouldn't be fair to have kids, and I'm running and I can't be present to parent and all those different kind of things. So it was a million reasons that I observed, like, well, it just rationally, it just doesn't seem like the best fit for me. But you're in it. And I'm wondering, and I of course watch the church from where I am now, and all the church all the time. Like I could be watching. I was watching the revival, and I was watching, and I took dozed off, woke up. Y'all still in?
That's good. You went to sleep and woke up, and we
Woke up. They're still
it.
in church. The Ty Hall will not quit. He is just going. He just does not have a watch. He is going just.
But you know what, Patrick? I had to develop a rhythm for my life. I had to develop a rhythm, and I had to learn that I am human, and I'm only one person.
Yeah.
And so there were times when I would have to have hard conversations with my husband over down through the years, because I realized that that's who he is. He don't get tired.
No,
he don't get tired.
No.
And he'll say, I could do this every day, all day.
He loves church, and that's a different animal.
Yes, he loves it.
Yes,
and
yes.
I knew that. I knew that going into the marriage. I did, and we would have conversations about this, but to actually see it and experience it, this is who he is. I had to come to the realization that's not who I am. I love church. I love God, but I like balance. And we would have these conversations. And he knows that, okay, I'll see you when you get home. I'm gonna take the night off. And I don't feel guilty about it anymore. Years ago, I used to feel guilty, like, oh, I should be doing more. I should be doing more because he's doing it. That's his grace.
Right.
That is his grace. That's not necessarily mine. I will show up. I will be present, but that's not me. I have balance with my life. And one of my missions as his wife is to bring balance to his.
Yeah, and that would be like, that was my next question. And I'm sure he appreciates, probably in ways that he didn't realize he would, that you have somebody who will counterbalance that drive in you, and ground you a little bit. And I'm sure while that's frustrating, because I think ultimately that's what a good companion does. Like I tell my brothers, who were thinking about, young brothers who were thinking about getting married, I said, if you get a good woman in your life, she's going to get on your nerves sometimes, because she's going to either push you to be more, or she is going to say, you need to slow down and be here. Right. And both of those actions are needed. Right. Yes. But it doesn't always, it can feel frustrating sometimes. And I'm wondering, in those moments where you're trying to counterbalance his instinct to always go, is it still an issue, or is he more receptive to, well, yeah, I haven't been going, and perhaps we need to, take a couple of days and go somewhere, or just be at home and be okay with that?
He's a lot more receptive. He is a lot better. It has not been in vain, Patrick. My word has not been
It's gonna be extra stars in your crown when you get
that work has not been in vain. It has been 18 years and counting, but
Yeah,
he's a lot better. He is.
yeah.
And so, you know, I'll tell you also the pandemic.
Mm.
The pandemic was a nice benefit for us.
No. I totally understand. I totally understand that. It was.
It was a nice benefit for those
Yeah,
that church.
yeah,
Now you don't have nowhere to go.
yeah.
You have no choice but to slow it down because
Right,
ain't nothing open.
right,
You know, and so that also was because we were in the home together, and even though
mhm,
we were both working, I was in one room on the Zoom, he was in another room on the Zoom, and we were still doing ministry, just in a different way.
mhm,
It gave us time to bond, get to know one another again.
mhm.
And, for some, the pandemic split some houses. And then for some, it
Yeah,
made some houses come together.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that one of the reasons why it did not affect us in a negative way is because I was already practicing balance and getting him to be more balanced.
Mhm,
And I had already made up in my mind. I saw marriages fail because of ministry.
mhm,
I saw that growing up. I saw husbands and wives that seemed like they were just the happiest and then, no longer together. And
yeah,
one of the reasons is because there was no balance in the home, church. I saw a different way. I saw my parents, in ministry full time,
mhm,
but also having balance. And I
yeah,
was determined I was going to have that for my marriage. So he's a lot better. He's a lot more receptive. And I allow him to be him, and he
mhm.
allows me to be me.
I'm gonna let you go. This is great. I'm not gonna keep you all night. Thank you again
You're
for doing this
welcome.
for me. But you brought up something that I want to talk about. Then when I talk about some of the things you got coming up, and then I'll let you go. There was a movie that came out called Honk for Jesus. I think that was the name of it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And you had a live discussion about it with some pastors' wives, and I kind of snuck on and watched it later because I was very, very intrigued. I know how I saw it, and I know what I have seen in my own life, and I was like, well, this is they kind of telling the truth about some things. And you are of a generation of pastors' wives that have more opportunities than your predecessors, that they work behind the scenes. And I would, honest to God, there are some pastors, if their wife walked up to me, I wouldn't know it was them because they were unseen. Like they just
Mhm.
didn't
Yes.
know. Like she was
Yes. Yes.
like didn't know. And yet you are of a generation that are more visible, have way more opportunities, more entrepreneurial, more independent, and not so dependent upon the marriage for all of your identity. And yet when I looked at the movie, I was like, well, this is happening in real time, right? With this, and I remember the scene that struck me. A lot of it was struck me poignant, but when she put on the white face and
Hmm.
was dancing, and I thought, oh, that's just a marvelous metaphor for the mask that pastors' wives have to put on, and not just pastors' wives. It could be a wife. It could
Yeah.
be Black women
Yeah.
who have to put on in order to try to hold something together that they feel like is breaking apart. I'm wondering, did you observe some of those things, in some relationships, maybe up close, maybe from a distance? And how did that influence how you wanted to live out your existence as being a woman who stands alongside a pastor?
The movie, it resonated a lot with me, which is why I just felt compelled to do a discussion about it,
Mhm,
because I knew that if it resonated with me as a wife and a pastor's wife, that for those that have watched it that are in the same position that I am, it
mhm,
resonated with them as well.
mhm,
And there was a time in our marriage that I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore.
Mm.
I've talked about it. I've shared it. There was a time where I felt like I was losing my identity. I just did not know who Andria was. I was, trying to really show up and be present, and I was just dying on the inside. I
Mhm.
really was, because prior to marriage, I was comfortable in my skin. I was confident. I knew where I was going. And although I had prayed for marriage and wanted a husband, and God had blessed me, He had honored His word to me. Just the dynamics of our marriage with ministry, and in the course of our marriage, he had several elevations. So he went from a pastor to a bishop,
Mhm.
and then he went from a bishop to an archbishop. And each elevation, I had to change. I had
Right.
found myself trying to adapt to every elevation. Now he's not just running a congregation, he's running an organization.
Mhm.
He's pouring into other pastors. And through all of this, I was excited for what God was doing for his life. And I'm his number one, fan, number one supporter, but I had lost who I was.
Mhm.
And so it started to bring all of these other things in me. Anxiety. I was dealing with anxiety. I was dealing with like an identity crisis. There were times I was there in service and just not there.
Mhm.
It just,
Mhm.
I just didn't know who I was anymore. And so when I saw that scene, I know exactly what
Mhm.
that's about.
Yeah.
I know that you can be so caught up in who your husband is, and all of that, that you begin to lose yourself. And so this is why a pastor's wife and a wife in general needs a safe space.
Mhm.
She needs a safe space where she can cry, vent, ask questions, voice her anger, her disappointment, her misunderstanding, whether that be through therapy, whether that be through someone that you feel that is a confidant, a safe space so that you can rebuild yourself.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, in that movie, she didn't have that safe space. She
No.
didn't. And so there are a lot of women, not just pastors' wives, but a lot of women, wives in general, that, with marriage, you do lose. We always
Mhm.
talk about what's the gain in marriages, but we never talk about the losses in marriage.
Yeah.
And you do lose. You lose a part of yourself in order
Mhm.
to gain another part of yourself. And so I went through some things. I had to talk it out with some people. I had to take a break. And I
Mhm.
told my husband, I'm not happy. It wasn't anything he was doing wrong. It
Yeah.
was just, I didn't know who I was anymore. And I had to
Mhm.
find myself again. All of the things that I loved prior to, marriage, my writing and, producing plays and all of that stuff. I had put that stuff on hold to really build and be there and show up.
Mhm.
And I had to find myself again. And I told myself, once you find yourself again, don't you ever lose who you are. And so this is why I am so focused now,
Mhm.
and not just focus on what God has for my life, but now my mission is to help other women, and primarily those in marriage, that yes, you can lose your identity, but yes, you can find yourself again, and you can still live out your dreams and all of
Yeah.
no expiration date to it.
Yeah, and I'm happy because I'm happy for both of you all, because apparently he gave you the space that you needed in order to do that for yourself. And I think one of the roles as a partner is to be emotionally present enough with you that I don't let my masculinity get in the way. That if there's a problem with you, I need to fix it, and I want you to be okay so we can be okay, so we can be all right. But I think sometimes being a good partner means that I need to let you go through your process and to be as near you as I need to be so you can know that you're not alone, but I can't fix this for you. And
No,
so you need to be able to do that. And men are, we get to building and fixing things and trying to
yes,
play hero and trying to save everybody. And I think it takes a lot of maturity to say, well, you don't need me to save you. I'm not, I don't need to play hero right now. I need to be a supportive companion. And if this is You need to find yourself and go through your changes. I'm here with you, but go ahead and do it, and I'll be right here. Um, I think if you don't have that in a companion, if you don't have that in yourself to give
Yeah.
to somebody else,
Yes.
I don't know how successful or fulfilling the relationship would be, because there are issues going to come up that your partner can't do anything about. Like this isn't my issue. There's nothing I can say. There's nothing I can buy you. There's nothing in my little toolkit that will make this go away for you. You have to. This is your journey, and that's what you're going to have to do. And so I'm glad that you all had that between each other. Let me add this, and then we'll finish here. And I'll let you go. I promise. I'm gonna let you. I promise. You we've been in church together, and you talk openly about your health challenges at one point in your life and what that was like. And I remember you saying that you went through some changes, and you had questions about your own body and about how your husband was experiencing this and all the like. And I've heard you talk about it, and I'm glad. Praise God that you're okay and you're good. But I'm wondering, what was that experience like for you when your body starts doing things that without your permission that you do
Mhm.
not want it to do? Like, I've been in this body all this time. What is happening here? And you need care and attention that you never thought you would need. And I'm wondering, what was that process, and how did you all process that together? And how did you all come out on the other side, stronger, better, wiser for that experience?
That it definitely brought us closer together.
Mhm.
And you made such a great point about how men, and my husband says the same thing as well. Husbands want to be the fixers. They just want to solve the problem.
Yeah.
They want peace in their home. They want happiness in their home. So if it means I got to fix this issue, I'm going to do it. And there were times where he couldn't fix it. It was a me and God situation.
Mhm.
And I would tell him, just listen. I don't need you to give me a solution. I just need you to be emotionally present and just
Mhm.
listen. There are going to be times where I'm going to be emotional. I'm going to cry. When I got the diagnosis of breast cancer in 2018, that particular day when the nurse called me
Mhm.
and told me over the phone that I had breast cancer, he happened to be home that day, which was very rare.
Mhm.
He's always on the go. He's either at the church
Right. Yeah.
or, meetings. And I do believe that was God. I
Mhm.
believe that was God, that I wasn't alone when I received that news. He was actually in the house. So
Mhm.
he heard me on the phone,
Mhm.
and he immediately came into the room. And right after I hung up the phone, I was a mess.
Mhm.
And he was right there, and he told me, he said, we're going to fight. We're going to fight. We're going to pray. We're going to do it all, and you're going to be fine.
Mhm.
And that's all I needed to hear from him. Honestly, that's all I needed. I just needed to hear, I'm going to be fine, and you're going to fight with me. And it was a fight. It was a long fight. And sometimes I felt I was alone. I knew he was there for me, but it was just one of those instances
Yeah.
that when
Yeah.
you're in something like that, no matter how many people tell you that they're praying for you, that they're supporting you, at the end of the day, you do feel alone.
Yeah.
When you got to go to every doctor's appointment and procedure after procedure, you feel alone.
Mhm.
And that's just, we've gone through some things with him losing his voice, and
Mhm.
he had to have vocal surgery and
Mhm.
going through all of that, and him not being able to preach, and me stepping up to preach at the, it was just, we've been through some stuff.
Yeah. Life. Yeah.
We've
Life
been
happens to
through life.
everybody. Yes,
Life,
it does. Yeah.
and just learning how to navigate it, and praying our way through, and stepping up, with the things of the house and
Yeah.
all of that, and still running businesses, and step being there for our congregation and for other pastors and their
Mhm.
spouses, and just dealing with life. So I tell individuals that when you're going through life challenges, and you have, whether it be a husband or a wife, or if you're engaged, or, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the relationship is, the best thing that you can do for your partner in that situation is just to be emotionally present.
Yeah.
Don't, you know, whatever they're going through, especially physical challenges, don't ever say, oh, well, God's gonna take care of it. They don't need to hear that.
Mm.
They know God is gonna take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you don't, there's certain things that I've learned that just, God is there with you. God is going to bring you through, but it don't take away the pain and it don't take away your questions. Like, why am I going through this?
Mm-hmm.
Why is my health being just be emotionally present. Just let them know that you are there.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually all I needed from him at that point, was just knowing that he was there. He was there. He was going to be there, and he was. And we went through it together, and it brought us closer together. And we've just learned that, the word of God is true. His grace really is sufficient.
I'm wondering, during those times, you probably sat with your mortality in a way you did not have to sit with before, right? It's like, oh, I'm in the middle of my life, and there's this challenge, and like, oh, perhaps I'm not going to live forever.
Right.
Perhaps I'm not going to live as long as I thought I was going to live.
Yes.
And every day is precious. Like you start counting those days that you do have, and you do feel good a little differently. You're appreciative because we all know, well, perhaps we won't,
Right.
live to be 150 years old.
Yeah.
Did that experience change how you saw life itself and your body? And I'm sure perhaps you had to readjust your relationship with your body and renegotiate some things in your own head and your heart about living in this body that had some challenges. What was your process? What was going on in your head during that time?
I'm going to be very transparent.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was going to be fine. I knew that a season of affliction was not the end all be all, but I wrestled with my grandmother's death that we did not see coming years ago. And I found myself revisiting that in my place of affliction. And so now I'm wondering, if she didn't make it, will I make it?
Yeah. And
I had those conversations with God. I did. I said, Lord, we did. I'm being very honest. I don't think I don't even think, Patrick, that I even shared this publicly like this. But I'm very, I said, Lord, she left us. You took her. Are you gonna do the same with me?
What's happening right now? What are we doing?
Yes, I am so serious, and I had to get my mind together because what started off as, oh, it's early, we're gonna catch it, then it turned into and evolved into, oh, it's spreading, it's a little worse than what we thought. You may lose your whole breast. I mean, it just seems like every doctor's visit that I had, the prognosis kept getting worse. And so I had to struggle with that, revisiting her death and how it happened and wondering if it was going to happen to me. And so I learned that the battlefield really is in the mind.
The mind, yeah.
And still showing up as a first lady, showing up as a pastor's wife, still teaching the people. I'm teaching people about faith, and I'm in my own faith crisis. I'm telling people God's going to deliver you. He's going to bring you out. And then I'm going.
And you in a war, like you are in a, like you are.
I'm in a war. I'm in a war. I am in a war. And then having to deal with my femininity that's now being attacked. Like, how I'm going to look after all of this is over. Will I still be attractive to my husband? All of these things. It's a part of humanity.
It absolutely is.
All of those stages. I went through all of those stages. Like, what's going to happen after the surgery? How I'm going to look? Will I need reconstructive surgery? Will I need this? Will I need that? All of that stuff is things for months that I had to fight inwardly and literally, cast down imaginations and say, no, you're not going to think like that. No, what happened to your grandmother is not going to happen to you. You
Sure.
are going to live. You're going to have a great quality of life. You are still beautiful. You are still all of this stuff that I'm telling everybody else. I now got to tell myself.
Mhm.
And God is good. He's faithful. You know, what they said did not happen. And this is why you got to know your body, and you gotta listen to your body, and you have to speak up for yourself in situations like that.
Mhm.
Because the doctors could be saying one thing, but you got to speak up. And I tell people, like, speak up for yourself.
Yeah.
Speak up for yourself when it comes to medical situations. If you're not comfortable with something, all of that, do your research and know what's going on for yourself,
Mhm.
know your body, and you also speak up for your body. And
Mhm.
so I did. I told them, I said, no, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want that. I don't think I need that. I think this is what you need to do.
Mhm.
And they listened and said, oh, yeah, we can do that. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting here like, you the medical professionals, and I'm sitting here telling you.
Right. 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 Yeah. No, no, no,
But,
no.
but
Right.
God is good. Went through all of that, still got
Mhm.
both of my girls, went
Mhm.
through radiation,
Mhm.
all of that, and I'm
Mhm.
out on the other side. And it's
Amen. Praise God.
2018 and it's 2023, and I'm cancer free. And
Praise God.
God is good.
God is good. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I knew it was going to be. So I really thank you for hanging out and taking out your time. You could have been, lounging around, getting ready for tomorrow. But thank you so much. Thank you for all the listeners, everybody who's been with us all this time. You all have chimed in. I see you. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Before I let you go, I do 5 quick questions
Okay.
to end. So you're good. So we're gonna run through the 5 questions.
Okay.
You'll be fine. Um, First question: do you believe in love at first sight?
No.
No.
Do I
Okay.
believe in a strong attraction? And for
Mhm.
yes, but not love. No.
Got you. Um, what do you believe about love?
I believe that love is eternal.
Mhm.
I believe that love really can be unconditional.
Mhm.
And I believe that love is what you put into it. So
Mhm.
if you put into something, if you sow into love, then you'll reap from love as well.
Wonderful. Next question: what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Ooh,
Mm.
shit.
All
I
right.
would tell a lot to that girl. So that's a whole nother
Mhm.
podcast.
Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
At 20 years old, I would tell Andrea at 20 years old that life happens,
Mhm.
that you have no control,
Mhm.
and the only person that really is in control is God. I
Mhm.
would also tell Andrea that dreams have no expiration dates,
Mhm.
and as long as you keep dreaming, you will always have the strength to execute your dreams.
That's wonderful. That's great advice. Next question: what makes a good lover?
Understanding,
Mhm.
understanding, communication,
Mhm. Mhm.
communication, understanding, and the will to be intentional in growing that
Mhm.
relationship.
Mhm.
So if both are willing to put the work in, there are no restrictions on how great each can be as it pertains to loving.
Got you. Last question: where do you find joy? Outside of Jesus.
Right.
Outside.
Yes.
I got
I
you. We
find
got it.
thank you. I'm glad you said that, because people will automatically think that I'm going to say
All the time.
no. I find joy in my family,
Mhm.
when I'm around my
Mhm.
siblings, when I'm around my nieces and nephews, when I'm around the people that I love.
Mhm.
I find joy when I'm alone writing
Mhm.
and creating.
Mhm.
I find joy watching my favorite TV shows,
Mhm.
reruns
Yeah.
that I can laugh at like I've never seen them before, but I've watched
Right.
them like 50 million times.
Right.
I
Right.
find joy.
Yeah.
I find joy in shopping. I love to shop.
Mhm.
I love creating. I love all things creating.
Mhm.
So I'm at my my most peaceful self when I am creating, whether it be writing, whether it be producing, whether it be communicating, whether it be speaking.
Mhm.
Um, that is where I feel like I'm the most alive, is when
Mhm.
I'm creating.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking our time. Thank you to our audience who's hung out with us. I appreciate it. We'll be back for one more episode. We're going to close out February, one more episode. So we'll be back next week. But thank you all. Thank you, Pastor Hudson. Where can people connect with you? What do you, is there anything new we should be paying attention to? If they want to connect with you on social media, how do we find you?
Yeah, so we just launched the Wives Matter Network,
Mhm.
which is an online network for wives and single women, those that are aspiring to be wives. We'll be offering monthly empowerment videos, personal and professional development, quarterly magazine, monthly live pop-ups, where we're going to be talking about everything from sex, relationships, balance, unforgiveness, betrayal, how to prepare for marriage. It's an online network that you can join, and you can go to my website at AndriaShudson.com. So that is brand new. And then, of course, if you want to order one of my books, you can order one of my books on my website. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. I'm on everything. I'm
Wanda, you
determined
there. You are
that
there,
I will
present.
be wherever it is. I will be there too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you all for hanging out with us. We're going to let Lady Andrea go, and then I'll see you all next week for another episode of the Love Again podcast. Bye-bye. Take care.